Welcome to Clothesline Theatre. We have been waiting for you to tune in to hear tales of Prince Edward Island, a place of history and some mystery. You may be surprised by the true stories that have been unearthed and brought to life by our radio dramas. We invite you to settle into a comfortable chair and let the voices and sounds trigger your imagination as you hear the following dramatic story.
Until recent times, it was a common occurrence in Prince Edward Island for several generations of a family to live in the same home. It was an economic necessity and often proved beneficial when it came to child and elder care and the division of work. But it also had its downside, as conflict could easily arise among the various generations. But could living arrangements actually lead to murder? That became the dominant question asked in the island community of Rose Valley in April of May of 1901.
So, it is to your brother in Boston that you are mailing the package, Charles?
Yes, he wanted my missus to knit him socks. He finds they keep his feet really good when he is delivering ice on hot summer days.
I imagine he pounds a lot of pavement in a big place like Boston.
Yes, during the height of the heat, he works 12 to 14-hour days keeping customers supplied.
Good morning, Grace and Earl. I don't think I have mail for you today.
I have learned from Malcolm McLeod that his mother died last night.
Isabella McLeod is dead? But I just saw her the other day. She appeared in the finest of health, although I do recall she would appear to have marks or scratches on her face.
Malcolm said his brother Archibald found her dead on the floor of the kitchen when he got up at midnight to check on a cow.
Do they know what happened?
He didn't say. Maybe she just dropped dead. She was 73, well past her 70.
Or maybe Archibald played a hand in his mother's demise. There's no doubt there's been marks of violence on her face on occasion.
Why point to Archibald?
His father, Donald, left half the farm to his wife and half to his son, and it has never been easy for Mrs. Donald living there under that arrangement. With Isabella dead, Archibald would inherit the other half of the farm.
Well, in my mind, Archibald's wife would have had as much cause as him. She's the one that has had to share a kitchen with Isabella the last 9 or 10 years. And we all know there is no kitchen big enough for 2 women.
Well, there should be an inquest called before her funeral. If there's any chance it was foul play, it can't be left unpunished.
But it was not to be so. The family saw no need for an inquest, and so Mrs. Donald McLeod was laid to rest on Thursday, April 9th, 1901, 2 days following her demise. But the talk of foul play grew so pronounced and the excitement so intense that the Attorney General of the province ordered the body of Isabella McLeod to be examined and an inquest held in the first week of May.
This inquest will now be called to order. Dr. Honeywell, coroner of Hunter River, will preside. The jury is made up of 7 respected gentlemen of our island community, and their names have been recorded. The Attorney General is being represented by Mr. J.A. McDonald.
Thank you, Clerk. Dr. Peter Conroy, who practices in Charlottetown, has performed the post-mortem. Please present your findings, Dr. Conroy.
Yes, Dr. Honeywell. I made an autopsy of the body of Isabella McLeod this morning, and in view of the gravity of the circumstances in connection with the woman's death, I was minute and particular. I found the body to be that of a woman about 73 years of age, well-nourished and in a good state of preservation, though interred for some days. No actual decomposition had set in of a noticeable character. I invite the jury forward to gather around to view the remains of Mrs. McLeod. As you will note, there is abrasions on the front and sides covering the anterior surface of the nose and part of the side of the nose. There was a continued wound at the right angle of the mouth, partly through the skin. There are 2 small abrasions below the right eye and 1 on the left part of the upper lip. In my examination of the deceased, I found that the larynx had been fractured. I removed the bone, and it is now in my possession. I found 2 large pieces of meat, not chewed, in the upper part of the gullet. At least they came out as 2 pieces. Those I also have. I examined the woman's mouth, and it contained a small quantity of fluid blood. On the upper jaw there were no teeth, and on the lower jaw there were 5 front teeth. This would have made mastication very difficult.
Please keep it simple for the jury, Dr. Conroy.
It would have made chewing difficult. I found no food content in her stomach.
If a person swallowed a piece of meat and it's stuck in the throat, would he or she attempt to swallow another piece?
Certainly not. The meat might have been placed by another person. There must have been pressing to break the bone in the throat. I do not think a fall would cause the bruising on her neck. A heavy body falling across her neck might cause the bruise. Her body was very fleshy, and the fat was very much bruised on the neck. The heart was good when I examined it, and the rest of the body healthy.
So there might have been enough meat to cause choking?
If the meat lodged in the windpipe, it might cause death, without the bruising.
So, what are you concluding?
I believe that the deceased came to her death by the violent means of strangulation. It pains me very much to say it, for I am quite aware of the responsibility I am under in making this statement.
Thank you, Dr. Conroy. The body will now be removed for interment, and the inquest will continue. Let us call our next witness, Archibald MacLeod. Mr. MacLeod, first, let me express my sympathy for the death of your mother.
Thank you very much, sir. It's much appreciated.
What was the nature of your mother's health?
She was very healthy. Other than the fainting spell she had a few years back in church.
Now, please tell this inquest the happenings of that evening of April 9th on which your mother died.
Well, it was no different than any other for our family. My mother had been visiting J.J. Bethume's, and so our tea was later than usual. Our neighbor Malcolm Mackenzie and his wife came over for a short visit, and when my family went to bed around 9:30 p.m., my mother was still in the kitchen, and it was her practice to stay up later than the rest of us. She liked to have lunch before she retired for the night.
Now, do you know what she had for that lunch?
I was in bed, so I didn't see her eat, but later I found bread and boiled meat in her room.
Go on.
I suppose I retired about half an hour when I heard the noise, but I paid no attention. I just thought it was one of the horses in the stable. I had set my alarm for midnight as one of my best cows was due to calve, and I wanted to check on her. The door to my mother's room was open when I walked by, and I thought it was strange that she was still up that late. When I entered the kitchen, I saw her on her side with her head towards the door. I spoke to her, but when she didn't answer, I went and turned her over, and she was either dead or dying. I was so shocked I didn't know which was.
What did you do then?
Well, I went to my brother Malcolm's house, and we returned together. We examined her body, and it was that time that we noticed the mark on Mother's cheek. It made me, to me, look like a scratch is received from falling against something sharp.
Was there any blood?
I didn't see any blood on the floor or on her clothes, but I noticed a little on her hands.
So once both of you and your brother determined your mother was dead, what was your next action?
I drove to Bird Album to tell my sister, Mrs. Matheson, of our mother's death, and Malcolm went to give word to some of our neighbors.
Did you think to ask for an inquest to find out the cause of your mother's death?
I mentioned it to my sister on Thursday morning after I heard some talk in the community about the desirability for one, but she said Malcolm was not in favor, and the funeral was that afternoon, so I let it go.
Edith MacLeod, the wife of Archibald MacLeod, was called to testify. She corroborated her husband's testimony about the evening's events. However, other witnesses were not as friendly. Malcolm Mackenzie and his wife, the neighbors who had visited the MacLeod home earlier in the evening of April 9th, told the inquest that they had noticed marks on the face of Isabella MacLeod that they thought were scratch marks. As well, sometime between 9 and 10 p.m. of the evening in question, Mr. Mackenzie heard terrible screams which sounded like those of a female in distress coming from the direction of McLeod's house. Charles S. McDonald, the teacher in Rose Valley, also testified to hearing a woman's screams as he came home that night from a neighboring community. Archibald's brother, Malcolm, and his wife also gave testimony that they too had seen the scratch marks.
The inquest jury has heard all of the testimony and has taken its time to deliberate the evidence. They are now ready to return to the room. Well, have you reached a verdict?
We have, sir. We, the undersigned jury of the late Isabella MacLeod, respectfully submit to you the following verdict. After carefully viewing the body and hearing the evidence, we come to the conclusion that the late Isabella MacLeod came to her death either by choking or strangulation.
It appeared the inquest jury was unwilling to deliver a clear-cut verdict. Just before midnight, Thursday, May 2nd, the sheriff, accompanied by a police officer, arrived from Charlottetown to arrest Archibald MacLeod for the murder of his mother on April 9th. They removed him from his bed, and fortunately for them, MacLeod, who stood over 6 feet and had a strong build, cooperated and came quietly, though he protested his innocence. He was lodged at the Charlottetown police station until the following morning when he appeared before the stipendiary Palmer. His representative assured the court he would be ready for trial by the following week.
How soon can I make bail, Jailer Hamill? I brought my bank book with me.
There will be no bail since the trial is next week.
Oh, but I need to see my wife. This will be hard on her. She's a nervous sort.
Saturday, May 4th and Sunday, May 5th passed for Archibald MacLeod, still a young man at 35, in the cell that was dedicated to those accused of murder. Precautions were taken to ensure his safety. Jailer John H. Hamill found him cheerful when he took him for a fresh air outing in the jail pen on Sunday afternoon.
Do you think this weather will hold?
I'm hoping. It looks like we might have a good spring.
It'll certainly make cropping an easier chore if the weather stays good. The grass is already starting to green up nicely. I made a mistake of taking my bank book with me. My wife will need it.
You can just sign an order and it will be turned over to her when she comes to see you on Monday.
The end of this will be the scaffold.
That is nonsense. There is no evidence against you.
I'm afraid my mind will give away as I can't stand.
A strong man like you should have no fear of your mind. Think the best and it will come about. There are good days ahead for you, Archibald MacLeod. Now get yourself a good night's rest.
Yes. Yes, there are good days ahead. I'll be putting in my crop.
Jailer Hamill bid the prisoner good night at 8:30 p.m. At 6:30 a.m., he opened the cell door and found MacLeod suspended from a bed slab.
This drama has
which
been
he had
brought to you
fastened
by
between the
Wide
bars
Heritage Properties
above the cell
Incorporated
door
through the
and
support
hung
of
from
the
a
Building
noose
Communities
made from a
through Arts and
towel cut
Heritage
into
Program,
strips.
Department
It was
of Canadian
apparent he had
Heritage,
stood on the
the
bed,
Province of Prince
put
Edward
his head in
Island,
the
and the
noose,
City of
and jumped
Summerside.
off. He was a mere 15 inches from the floor.
Dear God, what have you done? What have you done? They had no evidence against you.
The police and coroner were notified, and by 11 a.m., Dr. Conroy, with an appointed jury, was conducting an inquest. Dr. Jenkins gave evidence as to the manner in which MacLeod died.
Is the jury ready to deliver its verdict?
Yes, Dr. Conroy. The verdict of this jury is that the deceased Archibald MacLeod came to his death by hanging with deliberate intention of committing suicide.
Murder Probable in Rose Valley. Cast:
Narrator Stuart Smith. Postmistress Shelley Stetson. Charles Roger Ahern. Grace Michelle Askew. Earl Jake Surrett. Court Clerk Jim Dixon. Dr. Honeywell Wayne Wright. Dr. Conroy Jordan Stetson. Jury Foreman David Smith. Archibald McLeod Dan Casely. Jailer Hamill Nick Murray. Musician Christine Anderson Gallant. Sound Foleys Krista Bryson, Alexandra Gallant, Nathan Wiley. Recording Artist Peter Gallant. Assistant Max Gallant. Writer Marlene Campbell. Researcher and Editor Jean McKay. Production Assistant Sandra Zarby. This drama has been brought to you by Wyatt Heritage Properties Incorporated through the support of the Building Communities Through Arts and Heritage Program, Department of Canadian Heritage, the Province of Prince Edward Island, and the City of Summerside.